At Christmas dinner, my sister opened the door, rolled her eyes, and said, "We don't want you here. Go ruin someone else's holiday." I peeked inside and saw my whole family around the table, laughing. I just said, "Got it." 10 minutes later, my dad burst through the door, yelling my name. My own sister, Miranda, slammed the door in my face on Christmas Eve, telling me I wasn't welcome in our childhood home. But what she didn't know, what no one in my family knew that night, was that the painful truth I'd been holding onto for years was about to explode, shattering everything they thought they knew and exposing her darkest secrets. The cold December air bit at my face, a stark contrast to the warmth I could see through the frosted window. Christmas lights glowed, muffled laughter drifted out, and I clutched the casserole dish in my hands, a dish that had taken me 3 painstaking hours that very morning. My finger hovered over the doorbell, just for a moment, before I pressed it. The door swung open, and there stood Miranda, my older sister, draped in a red cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her eyes swept over me with that familiar look, a perfected blend of disdain and dismissal she'd cultivated over the years. "We don't want you here," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Go ruin someone else's holiday." I peered past her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the living room, then the dining room through the archway. The whole family was there. Mom was serving dishes, laughing at something Uncle Preston had said. Dad stood, ready to carve the turkey with his usual theatrical flair. Aunt Sylvia was meticulously arranging napkins. Even Grandma Edith, who usually napped through half of Christmas dinner, looked animated and joyful, directing traffic from her chair. They hadn't noticed me yet. Or maybe they had, and they just didn't care. "Got it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Miranda's lips curled into a satisfied smile, and then, she shut the door in my face. The click of the lock felt deafening, echoing in the sudden silence. I just stood there for a moment, the casserole dish still warm in my hands, wondering how I had become the family pariah. You know, it wasn't always like this. Nearly 3 years ago, everything had been different. I was the one hosting Christmas, the one everyone called for advice, the one who remembered birthdays and organized all the family reunions. Then, I made the mistake of telling the truth. I walked back to my car, carefully placing the casserole on the passenger seat. The engine turned over with a reluctant cough, and I cranked up the heat, trying to thaw the chill that had settled deep in my bones. My phone buzzed, a text from Garrett, the guy I'd been seeing for a few months. "How's it going?" he'd written. I just didn't have the energy to respond. Instead, I drove to the little coffee shop 3 blocks away, the one that stayed open even on Christmas, because the owner, who was Jewish, figured he might as well make some money on a holiday he didn't celebrate. I ordered a black coffee, found a corner booth, and just stared at my phone. About 10 minutes after Miranda closed that door, my phone suddenly exploded with an incoming call. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but some gut feeling, made me swipe to accept. "Vivian." His voice was so loud I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Where are you?" "At a coffee shop," I said, a little defensively. "Why?" "Get back here right now. Right this instant." "Dad," I started. Miranda made it pretty clear I'm not welcome. I don't care what Miranda said. "Get back here, now." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, confused and wary. This felt like a trap. Still, the sheer urgency in his voice had been undeniable. Against my better judgment, I left some money on the table for my coffee and drove back. When I pulled up to the house, Dad was standing on the porch, coatless, his face redder than I'd ever seen it. The front door was wide open behind him, and I could hear raised voices spilling out. "Get in here," he barked as soon as I stepped out of the car. I followed him inside. The cheerful atmosphere from 15 minutes ago had completely vanished. Mom sat at the dining table, her head buried in her hands. Aunt Sylvia looked incredibly uncomfortable, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Uncle Preston had his phone out, scrolling through something with a grim expression. Grandma Edith had her arms crossed over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Miranda stood by the fireplace, arms crossed defensively, while her husband Quentin sat on the couch, looking like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Someone want to tell me what's happening?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. Dad turned to face the room. Claudia, he said, gesturing to Mom, show her. Mom slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red, and I couldn't tell if it was from crying or pure anger. She picked up her phone from the table and handed it to me without a word. On the screen was an email. My heart sank as I recognized the sender immediately, Kenneth Lawson, the attorney who'd been handling Grandma Dorothy's estate since she passed away 2 years ago. My maternal grandmother had been the wealthy one in the family, the one who'd built a successful chain of bakeries from scratch and invested wisely. The email was simple, direct, and utterly devastating. Dear Mrs. Raymond Hartley, it began. As per your mother Dorothy's wishes, I am required to inform you that the distribution of her estate, which was initially scheduled to occur on Christmas Day 2024, has been delayed pending investigation into allegations of elder financial abuse. According to documents provided by your daughter, Vivian, there are questions regarding significant withdrawals from Mrs. Dorothy's accounts in the final year of her life. Until this matter is resolved, all assets remain frozen. Sincerely, Kenneth Lawson Esquire. My hands started shaking. I looked up, and every single eye in the room was on me. You did this, Miranda hissed, her face contorted. You vindictive, jealous. Miranda. Grandma Edith's voice cracked like a whip. Watch your mouth in my presence. But I know what she did, Grandma Edith interrupted, her gaze unwavering. What I want to know is why she felt she had to do it. I carefully set Mom's phone back on the table. My throat felt tight, but I forced the words out anyway. Because Miranda stole from Grandma Dorothy. That's a lie. Miranda's face had gone blotchy with rage. I helped her. I took care of her finances because she was getting confused. And you withdrew $47,000 from her checking account over the course of 8 months, I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. You used her credit cards to pay for your kitchen renovation. You convinced her to change her will to leave you the bakery building in Portland, Oregon. Even though she'd always said she was going to sell it and split the proceeds equally among all of us. I paused, letting the truth hang in the air. You were helping her manage her money by transferring it into your own accounts. Miranda's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Quentin, beside her, had gone very pale. Dad's voice was quiet, but razor sharp. Is this true, Miranda? She needed help, Miranda stammered, tears starting to form. She was forgetting things, getting confused about bills. I was protecting her money from scammers. And you were stealing from your own grandmother, I shot back. And when I tried to talk to you about it, when I showed you the bank statements I'd found while helping Grandma organize her paperwork, you told me I was being paranoid and jealous of your relationship with her. The room had gone completely silent, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. You went to the rest of the family, I continued, looking at Mom and Dad now. You told them I was causing drama, that I was trying to turn everyone against you because I'd always been envious. You said I was having a mental breakdown. You convinced them to exclude me from family events because my toxic behavior was upsetting Grandma Dorothy. Mom's face crumpled. Vivian, I tried to tell you, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. I tried to show you the evidence, but you chose to believe her instead. You all did. Uncle Preston cleared his throat. To be fair, Miranda said you'd been acting erratically at work, that you'd been fired for. I quit my job at Harrison Enterprises because my boss was sexually harassing me. I interrupted, cutting him off. I reported it to HR. And when they did nothing, I left. Miranda knew that. She knew exactly what happened, and she still told everyone I'd been fired for poor performance. Aunt Sylvia made a small, pained sound. After Grandma died, I went to her attorney with the documents I'd collected. Bank statements, credit card bills, the original copy of her will from 2019 versus the one she signed 6 months before her death. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to protect what Grandma Dorothy actually wanted. Which was what? Dad asked quietly. For her estate to be divided equally among her 4 children and 6 grandchildren, I stated. For the bakery building to be sold and the money split fairly. For nobody to get special treatment, because she loved us all the same. Miranda had started crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivulets. I took care of her. I visited her every week. I drove her to doctor's appointments. Where were the rest of you? You visited her every week after you got her to add you as a joint account holder. I corrected her, my voice unwavering. Before that, you saw her once a month if she was lucky. And you know who actually drove her to most of her doctor's appointments? Me. While you were taking client calls and rescheduling, because you were too busy. Quentin finally spoke up, his voice weak. Maybe we should go. No, Dad said firmly, his eyes fixed on Miranda. You stay right there. And in his expression, I saw something I'd never seen before when he looked at his eldest daughter. Disappointment so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in an instant. How much did you take? He asked. Miranda's tears came harder now. I didn't mean to. It just happened gradually, and I kept thinking I'd pay it back. How much? 63,000, Quentin said quietly. Maybe a little more. We used some of it for the house, some for the kids' private school tuition, some for. He trailed off helplessly. The number hung in the air like smoke. Jesus Christ, Miranda, Uncle Preston muttered, shaking his head. Grandma Edith stood up slowly, using her cane for support. She walked over to where I stood, and took my hand. Her skin was paper-thin and spotted with age, but her grip was surprisingly strong. You were right to report this, she said, her voice clear. Dorothy was my sister. I know exactly what she would have wanted, and it wasn't for one grandchild to rob her blind while she was dying. Miranda flinched as if she'd been slapped. Mom, please, my mother started, but Grandma Edith shook her head. Claudia, you raised one daughter who did the right thing, even when it cost her everything, and another who stole from her dying grandmother. I know which one Dorothy would be proud of. Mom's face crumpled completely, and she started sobbing into her hands. Dad moved to comfort her, his hand on her shoulder, but his eyes stayed on me. How long? He asked, his voice heavy. How long have we been shutting you out? Nearly 3 years, I said. Since about 2 months after Grandma's funeral, when Miranda convinced you all that I was the problem. I shrugged. And you came here tonight anyway. I thought maybe. I don't know what I thought. Aunt Sylvia got up and walked over to me. Without a word, she pulled me into a tight hug. I'm so sorry, she whispered against my hair. I should have listened. I should have asked more questions. Uncle Preston was next, awkward but genuine in his apology. Even Grandma Edith, who had just defended me, apologized for not being more involved, for assuming the younger generation could work things out among themselves. Miranda stood by the fireplace, isolated in her disgrace, Quentin beside her, looking utterly miserable. What happens now? Mom asked, finally wiping her eyes. The estate is frozen until the investigation concludes, I said. Kenneth said it could take months. They'll want to interview everyone, go through all of Grandma's financial records, probably depose Miranda formally. Can she go to jail for this? Quentin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Possibly, I said. Elder financial abuse is a felony in this state. If the DA decides to prosecute. I left the sentence unfinished. Miranda sank down onto the fireplace hearth, her face in her hands. Part of me felt a grim vindication watching her break down. Part of me just felt incredibly tired. Why didn't you come to me directly? Dad asked, before going to the attorney. I did, I reminded him gently. 3 years ago, you told me I was being ridiculous and that I needed to apologize to Miranda for making accusations. His face fell. I remember. God, I remember, and I didn't listen. None of us did, Mom said, her voice thick with tears. Miranda was so convincing. She said you'd been struggling, that you were lashing out, that this was a cry for help. And it was easier to believe her than to believe your daughter could be a thief, I finished, my voice devoid of anger now, just exhaustion. The turkey sat in the middle of the table, half-carved and cooling. The candles had burned down to waxy nubs. Christmas music still played softly from the speaker in the corner, incongruous against the heavy silence in the room. I should go, I said. No. Dad's voice was firm. You should stay. This is your home. This is your family. Miranda is the one who needs to leave. Miranda's head snapped up. You're kicking me out? Yes, Dad said. You stole from your grandmother. You lied about your sister. You destroyed this family's trust. So, yes, you need to leave. Raymond, Mom started, but Dad shook his head. I'm not negotiating this, Claudia. Miranda leaves, or I do. Quentin stood up slowly, helping Miranda to her feet. She looked at me with something between hatred and desperation. I hope you're happy, she said. You've destroyed everything. No, Grandma Edith said sharply, you did that yourself, girl. You stole, you lied, and you turned your family against someone who was trying to protect an old woman who couldn't protect herself. You have no one to blame but yourself. They left without another word. The house felt bigger without them, emptier, despite being full of people. I ended up staying for dinner after all. We reheated the turkey in the oven. Aunt Sylvia microwaved my casserole, and everyone made a point of complimenting it. The conversation was strained at first, full of awkward silences and careful topic changes, but gradually, things thawed. Uncle Preston told a story about his new job at the architecture firm. Aunt Sylvia talked about her daughter's upcoming wedding. Grandma Edith complained about her physical therapist with a kind of creative insults that made everyone laugh despite themselves. Around 9 o'clock, after the dishes had been washed and the leftovers packed away, Dad pulled me aside into his study. The room smelled like old books and pipe tobacco, even though he'd quit smoking 15 years ago. I need to apologize properly, he said. Not just for tonight, but for 3 years of failing you. Dad, let me finish. He sat down heavily in his leather chair. When you first came to us with your concerns about Miranda, I dismissed them. I thought you were overreacting, seeing problems where there weren't any. Your mother and we've always known you two had a complicated relationship. That's putting it mildly, I said, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Miranda has always been competitive with you, he continued. Even when you were kids, you were the one who got better grades, who made friends more easily, who seemed to just glide through life while she had to work for everything. I think she resented you for it. So, she stole from Grandma and framed me as crazy. I'm not making excuses for her, Dad said quickly. What she did was inexcusable. I'm trying to explain how we got here, how I failed to see what was right in front of me. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. When she came to us with concerns about your mental health, about you supposedly losing your job and acting erratically, it fit a narrative I'd already constructed in my head. You'd always been the responsible one, the one who had everything together. Maybe you were cracking under the pressure. Maybe you were lashing out at Miranda because you were struggling. Instead of asking me directly, I prompted. Instead of asking you directly, he agreed, and for that, I am profoundly sorry. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, snow had started falling, fat flakes drifting past the window like something from a greeting card. Kenneth Lawson called me last week, I admitted. He said the investigation was nearly complete, and that he was obligated to inform the family before Christmas. I could have asked him to wait, to send the email next week, so you could all have a nice holiday, but I didn't. Why not? Because I was tired of being the villain, I said. I was tired of missing family events, of watching from the outside, while everyone else got to be together. I was tired of being treated like I'd done something wrong when all I did was tell the truth. Dad nodded slowly. That's fair. That's more than fair. And maybe part of me wanted everyone to know, I continued. Wanted Miranda to be exposed. Wanted you all to realize you'd chosen the wrong daughter to believe. Also fair. Does that make me vindictive? It makes you human, Vivian, Dad said. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to want justice. You've earned that, right? He stood up and crossed to where I sat, pulling me into a hug. I let myself lean into it, surprised by how much I'd missed this simple contact. We're going to make this right, he said. However long it takes, we will. I drove home around midnight. Garrett had texted 3 more times, each message more concerned than the last. I called him from the car, putting him on speaker, as I navigated the empty streets. Are you okay? He asked immediately. I was about to start calling hospitals. I'm fine, I said. It's been a strange night. Strange how? I gave him the abbreviated version. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I appreciated most about him. So, he summarized when I finished, your sister's probably going to be charged with a felony. And your family just realized they've been treating you like garbage for 3 years based on lies. That about covers it. How do you feel? That was the question, wasn't it? How did I feel? Vindicated, I said finally. And sad and angry that it took this long. And guilty for feeling vindicated when my sister's life is probably about to fall apart. You're allowed to feel all of those things, Garrett said gently. They're not mutually exclusive. She stole from our dying grandmother, Garrett. She looked me in the eye and called me crazy for pointing it out. She turned my entire family against me. I know. And part of me wishes I'd never found those bank statements. Wishes I'd just let it go. Let her get away with it, because at least then I'd still have my family. But you wouldn't. Not really, he said. You'd have the illusion of family while they all believed lies about you. He was right, but it didn't make it easier. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of phone calls and awkward conversations. Dad called every day, sometimes twice, trying to fill the 3-year gap with words that could never be enough. Mom called less frequently, her voice always thick with tears and regret. Aunt Sylvia sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and handwritten notes apologizing for every missed birthday, every holiday invitation I'd been excluded from. Uncle Preston showed up at my apartment on December 28th unannounced. I almost didn't answer the door when I saw him through the peephole. I know you probably don't want to see me, he said when I finally opened it, but I needed to say this in person. I stepped aside to let him in. My apartment was small, a 1-bedroom in an older building that I'd moved into after quitting my job. The furniture was mismatched, bought secondhand, or inherited from friends who were upgrading. It was a far cry from Miranda's colonial, with the renovated kitchen. Preston sat on my threadbare couch and looked around, and I saw him register the difference between my life and the one his niece had been living on stolen money. I voted to exclude you, he said bluntly. When Miranda called that family meeting 3 years ago, when she laid out all her concerns about your behavior and your accusations against her, I was the one who suggested we create some distance until you got help. I thought we were protecting the family from drama. I sat down in the armchair across from him and waited. I'm an architect, he continued. I make my living being detail-oriented, noticing things that don't add up. And I didn't notice. Or maybe I did notice and chose not to see. Miranda's new car, the kitchen renovation, the private school tuition on a household income that shouldn't have supported it. I knew Quentin's consulting business was struggling. I knew they'd been worried about money. But it was easier to believe I was the problem, I said. Yes, he met my eyes. It was easier. Miranda has always been persuasive. Even when we were kids and she was just my niece, she could talk her way into or out of anything. She'd tell these elaborate stories, and you'd believe them because she believed them. I think that's what happened with Dorothy's money. She convinced herself she was helping, that she'd pay it back, that it wasn't really stealing because they were family. That's not how the law sees it. No, it isn't. He rubbed his face tiredly. My sister is beside herself. Claudia keeps saying she failed as a mother, that she should have seen this coming. Raymond is drinking more than I've ever seen him drink. And Edith, he shook his head. Mom is 92 years old. This kind of stress could kill her. A flash of anger cut through my numbness. Are you here to ask me to drop the investigation? Because it's out of my hands now. The DA is involved. The estate attorney is involved. And even if I wanted to, no, Preston interrupted firmly. God, no. I'm not asking you to do anything except accept my apology. What Miranda did was inexcusable, and what we did to you in response was almost as bad. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on the coffee table between us. That's a check for $15,000. It's not enough. It could never be enough, but it's what I can afford right now. Consider it back payment for every birthday, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving you missed because we shut you out. I stared at the envelope without touching it. I don't want your money, Preston. Take it anyway. Use it for therapy, for a vacation, for whatever you need. You spent nearly 3 years being punished for telling the truth. Let me try to make a tiny dent in that debt. After he left, I opened the envelope. The check was made out for exactly $15,000. I folded it back up and put it in my desk drawer, unsure what to do with it. Blood money. My grandmother used to call payments made to ease guilt. But then again, Grandma Dorothy was dead, and her blood money was what had started this whole mess. New Year's Eve came. Garrett wanted to go to a party his coworker was throwing, but I couldn't face a room full of strangers pretending to be excited about fresh starts and new beginnings. We compromised on dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant and champagne on my couch at midnight. "Tell me about your family before all this happened," he said as we waited for our entree. "What were they like when things were good?" I thought back to childhood, to summers at the lake house Grandma Dorothy used to rent, to Christmases that felt magical instead of weaponized. "Miranda and I were close once," I said, surprising myself. "Before the competition started, before everything became a comparison, we used to put on plays for the family, elaborate productions with costumes we'd make from Mom's old clothes. Miranda was always the star, and I was always the supporting character, but I didn't mind. She was good. Really good. She could make you believe anything when she performed." "What changed?" "High school, maybe. I got into the advanced placement classes and she didn't. I made the varsity soccer team as a sophomore, and she'd been cut from JV. Little things that accumulated into this wedge between us. By college, we barely spoke unless we had to. The waiter brought our food, and I pushed pasta around on my plate, not really hungry. After college, we had this unspoken truce. We'd be civil at family events, exchange birthday texts, pretend everything was fine. And then Grandma Dorothy started declining. And suddenly Miranda was the devoted granddaughter, visiting constantly, helping with finances, becoming the golden child in our grandmother's final years. While you were what? Working 60-hour weeks at Harrison Enterprises, trying to prove myself after the harassment complaint, trying to maintain some kind of normal life. I set down my fork. I visited Grandma when I could, which wasn't as often as I should have. So when Miranda painted me as the jealous sister who was barely involved, there was a grain of truth in it. Just enough to make the lie believable. Garrett reached across the table and took my hand. "You know none of this is your fault, right?" "Intellectually, yes. Emotionally, I shrugged. I'm working on it." Kenneth Lawson called me on January 3rd. "The DA wants to move forward with prosecution," he said. "They're offering your sister a plea deal. Plead guilty to 2 counts of elder financial abuse, make full restitution, and serve 12 months with possibility of parole. If she doesn't take it, they'll go to trial with all 6 charges." "What are you asking me?" "I'm not asking you anything. I'm informing you as a courtesy since you're the one who brought this to light. The DA wants to know if you're willing to testify if it goes to trial." I thought about facing Miranda in a courtroom, about having our family drama aired publicly, about the media attention that would inevitably follow. "Yes," I said. "If it comes to that, I'll testify." Miranda didn't take the plea deal. Her attorney, an expensive shark named Philip Cordoza, whom Quentin's family had hired, advised her that they could win at trial. The strategy, I learned later, was to argue that Grandma Dorothy had been mentally incompetent and that Miranda had been managing her finances as an informal conservator. They planned to bring in medical experts who would testify about dementia and confusion, painting Miranda as a well-meaning family member who had been trying to protect an elderly woman from herself. The problem with that strategy was Grandma Dorothy's doctor. Dr. Margaret Sheffield had been treating her for 30 years and had detailed notes from every appointment. While Grandma had experienced some age-related memory issues, she'd been mentally competent until the final month of her life. Dr. Sheffield was prepared to testify to that effect. February brought Miranda's arrest. I found out from a text message in a family group chat that I'd been re-added to sometime in January. The message was from Mom. "Miranda was arrested this morning. She's being arraigned this afternoon. Please pray for our family." I didn't pray. I went to work at the bookstore where I'd been employed since quitting Harrison Enterprises. I shelved books and helped customers find the perfect mystery novel or romance or self-help book. My coworker, a 60-year-old woman named Joan, who'd become something of a confidant, noticed my distraction. "Family stuff," she asked during our lunch break. "My sister was arrested for stealing from our grandmother." Joan didn't flinch. "The same sister who turned everyone against you?" I'd told her bits and pieces over the months we'd worked together. "That's the one. How do you feel about it?" Everyone kept asking me that, as if my feelings were a simple thing that could be articulated in a few words. "Like I'm watching a car crash in slow motion," I said finally. "Like I want to look away but can't." "That's fair," Joan said. "She made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences." But consequences rippled outward, didn't they? Miranda's kids, my nephew and niece, who I barely knew anymore, would grow up with a mother who'd been to prison. Quentin would have to explain to them why mommy had to go away. Mom and dad would spend years trying to reconcile the daughter they'd raised with the woman who'd committed felony theft. And I would have to live with being the person who set it all in motion, who refused to let it go, who chose justice over peace. The next few months were brutal. The investigation into Miranda's theft expanded as Kenneth Lawson's forensic accountant dug deeper into Grandma Dorothy's finances. What had started as $63,000 turned out to be closer to $85,000 once they uncovered additional credit card charges and transfers Miranda had carefully hidden across multiple accounts. The district attorney decided to prosecute. Miranda was arrested in February, her mugshot appearing in the local paper under a headline about elder abuse. Quentin filed for divorce 3 weeks later, citing irreconcilable differences. Miranda moved into a studio apartment across town and got a job waitressing because no one would hire her for accounting work anymore. The family fractured further. Mom sided with Miranda, despite the evidence, unable to accept that her eldest daughter was a criminal. She and Dad fought constantly, their arguments echoing through phone calls and tense Sunday dinners. Uncle Preston stopped coming to family events altogether. Aunt Sylvia tried to maintain peace, but ended up exhausted and resentful. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I mostly felt hollowed out. The trial happened in May. I had to testify, walking through the evidence I'd collected piece by piece. Miranda's attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone with a grudge who'd manufactured a case against her own sister. But the bank records didn't lie, and neither did the testimony from the bank manager, who confirmed that Miranda had been the only one making withdrawals from Grandma Dorothy's accounts in those final months. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Miranda was convicted on 3 counts of elder financial abuse and 2 counts of fraud. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison with a possibility of parole after 12 months, plus restitution of the full amount stolen. I wasn't in the courtroom when the sentence was read. I'd done my part, and I couldn't stomach watching my sister be led away in handcuffs. Grandma Dorothy's estate was finally distributed in August, almost 3 years after her death. After legal fees and restitution to cover what Miranda had stolen, the estate was divided as Grandma had originally intended, equally among her 4 children and 6 grandchildren. Each grandchild received about $38,000. I put mine in a high-yield savings account and tried not to think about what it had cost to get it. Garrett and I broke up in September. It wasn't dramatic or angry. We just both realized that I'd never fully let him in, that some part of me was still locked in that moment on the porch when my sister closed the door in my face. He deserved someone who could give him more than the fragments I had left to offer. In October, almost a year after that Christmas dinner, Dad called me. "Your mother wants to talk to you," he said without preamble. "She's finally ready to admit she was wrong." "What changed?" I asked, my voice cautious. "Miranda called her from prison," he said. "She was angry. Blamed your mother for not doing more to help her legal defense. Said some things that..." He trailed off. "Let's just say Mom finally saw what she'd been refusing to see." We met at a diner, neutral ground. Mom looked older than I remembered. Her hair more gray than blonde now, lines around her eyes deeper than they'd been. "I'm sorry," she said before I'd even fully sat down. "I'm sorry for not believing you, for choosing Miranda, for losing nearly 3 years with you. I'm sorry for all of it. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to make her hurt the way she'd hurt me. But looking at her across the Formica table, I just felt tired." "Okay," I said. "Just okay. What do you want me to say, Mom? That it's fine?" "It's not fine. You chose to believe I was having a mental breakdown rather than accept that Miranda could be a thief. You shut me out of family events for nearly 3 years. You missed my 30th birthday, Thanksgiving, every Christmas. I tried to tell you the truth, and you called me a liar." She flinched, but didn't look away. "You're right about all of it. I needed you," I said, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts. "I needed my mother, and you weren't there." "I know." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." We sat there for a long time, neither of us eating the coffee and pie we'd ordered. Eventually, she reached across the table and took my hand. I didn't pull away. Can we start over? She asked. Not forget what happened, but try to build something new. Maybe, I said honestly. But it'll take time. A lot of time. I understand, she said. But I'd like to try. It's been 4 months since that conversation. We're trying, Mom and I. She calls once a week. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't. She invited me to Thanksgiving, but I haven't decided yet if I'll go. Dad and I are in a better place. We meet for breakfast every other Saturday, and he's stopped making excuses for anyone. Miranda is scheduled for parole review in 3 months. If approved, she'll be released after serving 14 months total. I haven't decided yet if I'll write a statement supporting or opposing her release. Part of me hopes she's learned something, grown somehow from the consequences of her actions. Part of me knows people rarely change that fundamentally. What I do know is this. I told the truth when no one wanted to hear it. I stood alone when it would have been easier to stay silent. I lost my family for nearly 3 years. And when they finally saw the truth, it was because I refused to let lies win. Standing on that porch last Christmas, watching through the window as everyone laughed without me, I'd felt like the loneliest person in the world. But I wasn't wrong. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the problem. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. Sometimes justice feels less like victory and more like survival. Sometimes you win the battle, but lose pieces of yourself in the process. But I'd do it again. Even knowing the cost, even understanding what it would take from me, I'd do it again. Because Grandma Dorothy deserved better than to be stolen from while she was dying. Because the truth matters, even when it's painful. Because silence in the face of wrongdoing is its own kind of crime. That's what I tell myself anyway. On the hard days when I wonder if it was worth it, the answer is always the same.